Hello everyone, this is Jotto and welcome to another deck tech. Now, for this episode I will be going over a Mech Shaman list which I will admit I completely ripped off of Tempo Storm's website. I'll put, I guess, the link to the meta snapshot I got it from. Now, I have tried out this deck a bit. I did edit one thing, and then I'm also kind of debating switching around a couple of other things, but this is just the blank list with one change. Now, the deck has been functioning pretty well. I've been trying it out. I'm going to do my next grinding the ladder with this deck, I think. So, yeah, I think it's definitely worth going over. So anyway, it is a mech midrange deck. I use the term mech loosely as it is mostly attributed to Power Mace, a card which I played a lot of back when GVG first came out. So big fan of Power Mace. But anyway, so top of the deck list you got the three powerhouses of Shaman, at least in terms of early game. Flame Tongue Totem, Earthshock, Rockbiter. These don't really need an introduction. Earthshock, arguably the best silence in the game. Rockbiter Totem, Rockbiter Totem. Right. Anyway, Rockbiter weapon, even though it will sometimes go on totems a lot. 3 damage for 1 mana is insane, and at the moment there's less aggro decks running around right now, so you can get away with damaging yourself. Flame Tongue, ridiculous value, also makes it practically impossible to lose to Warrior. Because you just play Flame Tongue, and then you can actually kill their threats with your Flame Tongue and other totems. You don't even need to invest the Flame Tongue, just time. So these are the big ones, don't really need explaining. Now what does need explaining is the lack of Crackle or Lightning Bolt. Now Crackle has been a standard in a lot of these, as I've just realized I am on TeamSpeak.
Sound muted. Let's
get rid of that. Anyway, Crackle has been a standard in terms of Shaman for the longest time at this point, but it's just not necessary in a deck with Power Mace. You already have Rockbiters, you already have Power Mace as your 3 damage removal, you just don't need Crackle. That's basically where that came down to, and I kind of agree, I don't really like Crackle in this kind of deck. So moving down the list, Haunted Creeper instead of an Neutron, even though there's Power Mace in the deck, I think that proves just how ridiculous Haunted Creeper is with Flame Tongue Totem. 3-2 with the Flame Tongue that then spawns 2 3-1s. It's absolutely insane value on its own, and also with Flame Tongue it makes it probably the single best deck to play Haunted Creeper, I guess, unless you're playing double Houndmaster, which no one is. Power Mace. Basically the reason for running mechs. Power Mace will do some disgusting things. It's actually a decent weapon on its own. Fiery War Axe has always been a good card. So 3 mana version of Fiery War Axe, I will take it. I will take a Hunter Bow. However, it also buffs one of your many mechs in this deck that just get ridiculous value out of Power Mace, and surprisingly you don't miss the trigger that often. Sometimes you do, but then you get value out of it anyway, making Power Mace a pretty good addition. Hex. One of the reasons to be playing Shaman, Hex is 3 mana, kill anything. In fact, it even bypasses the effects completely. Now the only card this does not get rid of is Dr. Boom, but nothing gets rid of Dr. Boom 1-for-1. So Hex will do a pretty good job though, deal with the 7-7, and your totems will absorb the Boom Bot hits. But besides that, Hex will be hitting lots of large things, primarily things like Ragnaros, Ancient of War, just 5-5s, anything you can't deal with. Not so much Lotheb in terms of the 5-5, simply because he blocks spells, but things like Ancient of Lore and any of the win conditions from Control Warrior just get completely destroyed by Hex. One of the best cards in the deck, and very, very necessary if you're playing Shaman. Lightning Storm, only a one-of. Lightning Storm is amazing, however, there is one downside. It's an AoE spell, it's not very good against non-aggro decks. And right now the metagame is a mix of mid-rangey decks with combo finishes and control decks. So as a result, Lightning Storm not fantastic, however you do need it against Mech Mage. Now, Mech Mage is a good matchup for this deck, however Lightning Storm is something which if you draw it you have a difficult time losing, but there's no Feral Spirits in this deck, which means you're a little softer to aggro. So Lightning Storm necessary for the Mech Mages and any other Mech variants running around, but in terms of the later game decks you don't really want it. Harvest Golem, it's a mech. It's one of the best 3-drops you can play. It's not Spider Tank, but with Power Mace, Harvest Golem is better, simply because the Damage Golem is also a mech. So Harvest Golem, very, very good. Also works with Flame Tongue Totem in a similar manner to Haunted Creeper, where it has 2 bodies. Arcane Nullifier. Now this is the thing I put in as a one-off just to try it. What I substituted out was actually piloted Sky Golem, because I was a bit worried about the sheer amount of high drops in this deck, considering it's supposed to be a more mid-rangey variant, and there just was a bit light on the 4 drops in my opinion. Having played it, I'm not sure. I think Gnomish Inventor is a bit bulk in this deck, a little bit bulky. But anyway, Arcane Nullifier basically is in this deck because it's a taunt that's hard to get rid of, and with Power Mace it is a little insane. A 4/7 with taunt that can't be targeted is possibly the most annoying card imaginable for a rogue. That's the main thing. I did get Arcane Nullifier against a rogue, and it just destroyed him. He could not kill it. The other time I got this with Power Mace in a couple of games I have played with this deck was against a Shaman who had to use double Rockbiter to get rid of it. Now keep in mind, that's a Power Mace activation and an Arcane Nullifier. It's not like I'm using the Power Mace for it because I already killed 2 things. So Arcane Nullifier has been extraordinarily powerful. Not sure if it's worth running 2 in any way, but I think 1 is definitely worth trying out. Gnomish Inventor. Now I reference this as a bit of bulk. It kind of is, and I'm still on TeamSpeak. Go away.
Disconnected.
Okay. Anyway, Gnomish Inventor is basically a consistency booster. It always has been in the Shaman decks. It's usually a 1-off. In this deck, it's a 2-off. Now, as best as I can figure, the reason that this isn't Azure Drake is simply because the deck is too high on 5 drops. And I kind of agree. I think the deck is too high on 5 drops, and if you ran Azure Drake, you would just draw way too many of them. Something I could see is maybe running 1 and maybe a second Nullifier, or maybe a second Storm. I don't know, I think you need a consistency booster of some kind if you're not running Azure Drake. So Gnomish Inventor, a bit annoying to have in the deck, but definitely good at cycling through your deck, and as a result, it's quite powerful. Piloted Shredder. Basically the best 4-drop you can run. It's a mech, it sticks around. If you notice a theme with these Flame Tongue Totem targets, it sticks around and it just trades decently. 4/3 is not fantastic as a first body, but it comes back, and a 4/3 will trade with a lot of stuff. Unfortunately it trades down, but then you get your 2 cost afterwards, which will probably finish off whatever bigger minion it was attacking. So Shredder over Yeti. I think Shredder is usually slightly better than Yeti, Mechanical Yeti I mean, but in this deck, because of Flame Tongue Totem, it's just way better. Anti-Keelbot, the last mech in the deck. Well, besides, I guess, Boombots. So yeah, Anti-Keelbot is the straight-up healing touch on a 3/3 mech. Surprisingly effective, and it's amazing that this is still catching people off guard in terms of how good life gain is sometimes, and it's one of the reasons why your Oil Rogue matchup goes from being terrible to actually, in my opinion, about 50-50? Maybe a bit less than 50-50 in terms of the Shaman, so maybe about 45-55 or 40-60. But the point is, it's winnable. You can win with Anti-Keelbots, and it also is very good against Hunter, which is not usually a good matchup. If you draw double Anti-Keelbot against Face Rush, you're laughing, basically, because it's just 16 health is so much against aggro decks. So Anti-Keelbot, surprisingly one of the better cards in the deck. It still catches people off guard, even though it has been basically proven to be good at this point. And I still have my golden one. Onto a little bit of spice in this deck. Bomb Lobber. Now, Bomb Lobber is one of those cards that's always been really close to being very good. But this is a tempo deck, which means it just is good. Bomb Lobber thrives in tempo decks. Why? Because your opponent usually has 1 thing on the board while removing your stuff, and you have 1 or 2 things on the board while removing his stuff. And then you play Bomb Lobber, and you remove his stuff while putting things on the board. And that's basically what wins you the game. Bomb Lobber along with Fire Elemental basically just let you drop damage on the board in one way or another off your minions, which is a very, very powerful effect. Now, this has messed me up once or twice, mostly with an Nerubian egg that was taken off a Piloted Shredder, and I couldn't kill the egg. So my Bomb Lobbers were made way worse. However, the first Bomb Lobber I played in that game was still very good. So far, besides that very narrow situation, Bomb Lobber never has been dead and has always felt good to play. So, very good card, very underestimated card, especially when your opponent sees it, but if you've ever played with Bomb Lobber in Arena, you'll know how good it is in terms of a tempo play. Loatheb. I don't really need to talk about Loatheb. It's just a staple in almost every tempo deck, or most decks in general. Control decks cannot run it if they want to, because the spell block isn't that useful in that deck. But anyway, Loatheb, 5 mana, 5/5, shuts down your opponent's removal for a turn, lets it get extra damage in, and is just big. That's my basic synopsis of Loatheb. Very good card. Fire Elemental, one of the best Shaman cards, possibly the best? I don't know, don't quote me on that. I mean, there's Hex, Fire Elemental, there's some good ones, but Fire Elemental, definitely the best Shaman minion. 6 mana, 6/5. It's like the reverse Highmane, where it's a 6 mana, 6/5 that Battle Cry removes instead of Death Rattle, gives you extra stuff to trade with. It's also pretty decent at just doing front-loaded damage sometimes to the face. When you need a little bit of extra reach, Fire Elemental can actually give you that reach. So Fire Elemental, one of the single best Shaman cards, and if you're playing a Shaman deck without 2 of them, you should put 2 of them in there, basically. So Fire Elemental, very, very good. Dr. Boom, the most value-centric 7-drop ever made. It's just impossible to 1-for-1 of Dr. Boom. That's basically why it's in every deck that can afford to run it. And this is no exception. This deck can afford to run it, and it will do so. Getting 2 Boom bots is very good, and a lot of your losses will come down to Dr. Boom and being on your opponent's side instead of on your side. That's basically how Boom works. Boom, very, very good card. Simply an insane late drop to the point when it's seeping into aggro decks at this point. So if it's going that far down the curve, then it's worth playing. So the other 2 cards in this deck are both Shaman legendaries. First being Neptulon. Now, unfortunately for me, I have not had a chance to play Neptulon yet with this deck. I just never draw him, which is annoying because Neptulon is one of my favorite cards. Basically, Neptulon is the card draw engine on a 7/7. It is super ancient lore. In fact, if it was a 6/6, it would be overpowered because you couldn't big game hunter it. So yeah, it is basically a giant ancient of lore that draws more cards. Something else to note is that 4 Murlocs are generally worse than 4 cards. However, getting 4 Murlocs at once that synergize with each other and being able to play them, usually next turn and the turn after Neptulon's been played, is just insane. I think the weirdest ones I've seen were 3 old Murk-Eyes and a Bluegill. But I have seen multiple Warlords. You can get multiple Warlords from this thing, and it's ridiculous once you get multiples of those on the board. Anyone who's played against Murlocs will know exactly what I mean. Multiple Warlords is brutal. Even multiple Murk-Eyes is pretty insane. You can get Bluegills, which are actually decent on their own. The only ones that are really not very good are things like Oracle, the small Oracle, and also the big Oracles. So you got the draw cards, which isn't fantastic because you just drew with Neptulon, so you don't even need the card draw. And then there's the 1 mana 1/1 that buffs other Murlocs, which just isn't that good to get. Tide Hunter, however, is still decent because you're playing Shaman and you have Flame Tongue Totem and Rockbiter, so you can make use of the tokens. Neptulon, basically the top of the curve, which is kind of funny because Alakir is technically the top of the curve, but in reality he's more of a Pyroblast. Speaking of Alakir, Alakir is your big swingy finisher thing that comes in at the end of the game and lets you break through control decks. Alakir with Rockbiter will deal a solid 12 damage. Now, with double Rockbiter, that goes up to a whopping 18. That will usually never happen. But yeah, Rockbiter and Alakir will end a lot of games. Flame Tongue Alakir is also 10 damage. That's not to be underestimated. So there's a lot of combos you can do with Alakir that just do straight up damage. And not to mention, he's not that bad to play on his own. I have played him straight out as a taunt with Divine Shield, or just to remove one of their guys and then leave with 3/5 on the board. Basically a Senjin and an Argent Commander in one. So I think Alakir is very good. Not sure exactly how good, but I think he's been going out of favor a bit in these Shaman decks, and I think in this kind of build where you can close out the game faster, Alakir has definitely been good. Now, before I go off, I want to talk a little bit about matchups. This deck is basically good against all the things Shaman is good against, and bad against all the things Shaman is bad against. Now, Since Shaman hasn't really been played that much recently, I'll go through them. It's good against Druid. Of all shapes and sizes, it's good against Ramp, it's good against Fast Druid, it's just good against Druid. It's almost impossible to lose with against Control Warrior. I would actually say it's a 90-10 matchup if you play properly. By properly, I mean just totem every turn and just keep stuff on the board, and then he brawls and then he loses. That's basically how it goes. So very good against Warrior, good against Druid, bad against Hunter, not fantastic against Oil Rogue. That's the real thing keeping this deck down at the moment, is bad matchups against what are arguably the two best decks, being Midrange Hunter and Oil Rogue. But besides that, there is one thing that is bringing Shaman back up a little bit, which is the fact that Priest is non-existent. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Priest is the worst matchup for Shaman in the game. In fact, it is almost as bad as Freeze Mage to Warrior. Actually, no, that's not true. Nothing as bad as Freeze Mage against Warrior. It's like 10%, basically. You win about 10% of your games against Priest. It's so bad that you actually celebrate when you beat them. Now, it's not like Freeze Mage, where it's literally impossible to lose as Warrior against Freeze Mage, but it's close. It's pretty bad. I'll just leave it at that. It's pretty bad, but then Priest is non-existent right now. Other thing to note is Paladin is about half and half. You've got Warlock is generally half and half or favored into the Shaman depending on the build. So deck has pretty good matchups against most of the metagame besides the best two decks, which is what holds it down a little bit. But anyway, thank you all for watching. If you like the content, please subscribe. If you have any feedback, put it in the comment section below. As I said, the next Grinding the Ladder I do is going to be with this deck. So that will be up in the next couple of days, and tune in for that. Bounce analysis from Jotto, signing off.